the specific reasons for us being here tonight, I think the foremost is probably called Gaza. I mean the Israeli attacks on Gaza in 2008, since that was the moment when Ruth Freeman, the editor of the book, got the idea for a book in which writers would take sides, as they did in Spain in the 1930s. But of course, I also mean attacks in 2012, and again, maybe especially in 2014. In Gaza in 2014, probably everybody knows this, the Israelis bombed 7 United Nations schools. It's not really relevant, but my children attended a United Nations school. Israel had deliberately bombed densely populated urban areas before, for example, in Lebanon in 1982, which was a turning point for a number of people I interviewed for a film I made about how people change their minds on the subject. There is something about knowing in advance that 7 or 8 out of 10 of the people you kill will be civilians, and then going ahead and killing them anyway. The principle here, one commentator remarked, is that if you voted for Hamas, Israel says it has the right to murder you. But in fact, that's not quite right. Israel clearly decided that it can also murder those who did not vote for Hamas, including quite a large number of people, over 400, who are too young to have voted for anyone. When I think of how the victims in Gaza entered into the US election cycle this year, not entirely satisfying, but something, it seems to me that in its 2014 attacks on Gaza, Israel crossed a line, perhaps a line even more dramatic than the one it crossed in 1982 when it bombed the civilian population of Beirut. And little by little, we're going to be seeing more signs of a sea change in moral common sense. You all know what extraordinary rendition means. It means the transfer without due process of law of a detainee into the custody of a foreign government for the purposes of detention and interrogation. That is the laundered definition. A less laundered definition might start with the word abduction on the front end and conclude with the word torture on the back end. But even so, the phrase has its poetry, as Ruth Freeman points out in her introduction. There she turns the phrase upside down, making it designate the courage of writers who in their turn pay homage to the greater courage of the Palestinian people, rendered helpless by the systematic destruction of their lives. I might quibble about whether helpless is the inevitable word, given that persistence in that place, persistence in spite of everything, persistence is itself a kind of resistance. But it's still, I think, a very artful rendering of the writerly solidarity at a distance that brings us together. These renditions are also extraordinary in the sense that transferring words to foreign countries is not something writers are in the habit of doing, not an ordinary thing writers are expected to do. So these writers are here to say what it meant and means for them to do it. I'm going to add one final word on another sense in which the phrase seems to me very well chosen. It puts front and center the conduct of the United States, and not just as the prime supporter of Israel. Politically speaking, we're living in what I would call the era of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. As those of you who've been following BDS and the violent reactions against it will know, one of the strongest arguments against it, at least on the part of people like Noam Chomsky, who one would have expected to support it, has been the people in glass houses argument. That is, who are we Americans to boycott anybody? The phrase extraordinary rendition is a reminder that we do indeed live in a glass house. Personally, I believe we have to throw our stones anyway. Maybe we have to do so while hoping that our own windows will be shattered. Okay, so This is some more introductory material about the other speakers. You can all Google them and find out more. There is an immense amount more for everybody here. We're going to go in this order. Ruth Freeman is a Sri Lankan and American writer, activist, and speaker. Her graduate work focused on female migrant labor in the Middle East, and she's worked in the fields of international social justice and humanitarian and disaster relief programs. Her novels, A Disobedient Girl and On Salma Lane, appear in multiple translations. Her second novel was the winner in 2014 of the Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize for Fiction by an American Woman, and is longlisted for the Impact Dublin Literary Award. She blogs for the Huffington Post on literature and politics. Marilyn Hacker is the author of 13 books of poems, including A Stranger's Mirror, Names, and Desesperanto, an essay collection, Unauthorized Voices, and 13 collections of translations from the French. Diasporenga, a collaborative sequence written with Dima Shahabi, was published by Holland Park Press in 2014. She's received 2 Lambda Literary Awards, the PEN Award for Poetry and Translation, the PEN Volker Award, and the International Argana Prize for Poetry from the Beit Ashir House of Poetry in Morocco. She lives in Paris, but it's good to have her in New York now. Lawrence Joseph is the author of 5 books of poetry, most recently Codes, Precepts, Biases, and Taboos, Poems 1973 to 1993. He's also the author of 2 books of prose, Lawyerland and The Game Changed, Essays and Other Prose. He holds degrees from the University of Michigan, the University of Cambridge, and the University of Michigan Law School. His work has been widely anthologized and translated into several languages. He's Tinnelly Professor of Law at St. John's University School of Law in New York. Nancy Krikorian is a New York City-based writer and activist. Her most recent novel, All the Light There Was, is set in the Armenian community of Paris during World War II. Her honors include a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, the Anahit Literary Award, a gold medal of the Writers' Union of Armenia, and the Daniel Varujan Prize of the New England Poetry Club. In 2010, she traveled throughout the West Bank as part of the Palestine Festival of Literature. Krikorian has been on the staff of Code Pink, Women for Peace, since 2003. Eileen Miles is a poet, novelist, performer, and art journalist, and is the author of 19 books, including I Must Be Living Twice, New and Selected Poems, and a reissue of Chelsea Girls in 2015. Born in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1949, Miles attended Catholic schools in Arlington and graduated from the University of Massachusetts in 1971. They came to New York in 1974 to be a poet. Their poetic education primarily took place at St. Mark's Poetry Project from 1975 to 1977 through attending readings and participating in workshops led by Alice Notley, Ted Berrigan, and Paul Violi. From 1984 to 1986, Eileen was the artistic director of St. Mark's Poetry Project. You see that everybody did their own writing here. Okay, so
thank you, Bruce. And Bruce was agitating, saying he didn't know how to moderate this. Oh my gosh, he couldn't do it. And I think you've done a wonderful job.
So far. Wait.
Yeah, the night is young. We expect you all to be here 3 hours from now when he fails. One of the questions that people often ask me is, why are you doing this? Why do you want to talk about Palestine? And I guess it's a justifiable question in some regard, because I'm Sri Lankan. I was born there, lived there all my life till I came to the United States to go to college. And then I eventually became a citizen just before the United States invaded Iraq, so under George Bush. So in some ways I'm kind of removed from this conversation as an American. I come to it like a stepchild, I guess. But I also grew up in a country which, despite 3 decades of civil war and foreign invasions and tsunamis and socialist uprisings that led to thousands of people, young people dying or disappearing, we grew up without fear. So people are very involved in politics, people talk about politics all the time, and nobody feels like they shouldn't. That somehow if they did something bad would happen. Bad things were happening all the time, but people spoke up anyway. And that's a culture I grew up in, and that's a family I grew up in. My family was always very involved in politics. And I begin this introduction, as Bruce said, well, we didn't, but we talked about it earlier, because my father was agitating, saying, what are you doing? You know, you're in America, and you're a writer, and you have been published, so why aren't you doing something? So there was this sense that, well, yes, this is my world, and if I can do something in this world that I'm a part of, then I should do it. I should be thinking about whether I'm the right person to do it or whether I have the right credentials to do it. It needs to be done, and I'll do it. So that's kind of the push behind, that's my answer. It was not because I'm the right person, it's just because it had to be done and somebody had to do it, and I just did it. But it wouldn't have come to pass if all of these writers who are in this book did not engage with the subject and speak about it with, in their own words, in this moving way that enables other people to engage with the topic the way that they have been doing with this anthology and beyond. So I'm just going to read a little tiny bit from my introduction, and I'll want to read something else. Glasses for the elderly. One last thing. When I became an American citizen, I was on TV, maybe because I was the diverse person in the middle of central Maine. So they videotaped me for the local news to say, why did you become a citizen? And I said I did it for my daughters. I have 3 daughters. And I feel like I want to model, or give them a model of citizenship that I think they should have. And that is not someone who sits around and complains about something, but actually goes out and does something about it, both as an American citizen and as a global citizen. So there's that aspect of it for me as well, personally. And I'm sorry I'm focusing on you. It's because you look kind and you're interested. So that's what you do.
Please don't be sorry.
Anyway, in thinking about what the nature of the way this book has been put together, we're fond of identifying ourselves with victims during certain historical moments. We were all Americans during 9/11. We were all from Newtown in the aftermath of that shooting. We were all Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner. We all rose and fell with the Berlin Wall and with Nelson Mandela. Yet we are rarely inclined to commit our art to documenting how exactly this comes to be. How do, in this case, the injustices experienced by Palestinians belong to us all? What makes us identify with people and a cause that is geographically remote, but pulses with an intimacy that belies that distance? How does the giving and receiving of help sharpen our resolve on other fronts and strengthen our bonds? And what forms can that solidarity and empathy take? Is it direct and literal, or oblique and fragmentary? While some writers, usually the most secure in their careers, expressed fear of backlash from an unnamed and unseen them, many more were open to persuasion to be nudged away from safe places or a sense of helplessness. That is why we have this title of Extraordinary Rendition. It is a choice that insists on reclaiming the truer, higher meaning of words that have come to imply the removal of human beings from their own environment, to be held without charge or access to legal or emotional recourse in a foreign country, a routine practice of the American government. By using these terms instead to describe the courage of writers in this book, who in their turn pay homage to the greater courage of the Palestinian people, who are rendered helpless by this systematic destruction of their lives, I hope to dismantle our national tendency to acquiesce to the manipulation of the language to which we must preserve our access. That too is part of the battle we fight. It is a title that honors the worth and work of each of these writers who chose to come forward to offer up work that they themselves frequently felt were flawed or insufficient or did not fit. I look at this work now, set one beside the other, and note only this, that each writer's work speaks both fearlessly and flawlessly of a specific moment or revelation, but that taken together they speak with equal power of a larger whole, one which demonstrates that our writerly preoccupations arc inevitably toward justice. And what I'm going to read for you from the book is the work of Hannah Block. She was diagnosed with 4th stage cancer and has been battling that for several months. And so when I approached her with this idea of would you write for the book, she, despite all the things she was going through, put me in touch with a great many other writers and enthusiastically embraced the whole project. And I think of her, you know, half the time she was in hospital undergoing treatment from which she did not know she might come out, from which, you know, she might not live, she might not survive. But she put herself out there and gave all that she had to the project. And that's kind of the, it embodies the courage of the writers here, not that everybody is dying, but that people gave everything they had. So I think it would be appropriate to read her, two things from her. One is The Fruit of the Land, a farewell song to the good old days by Dalia Ravikovich, which Hannah translated. You asked if we've got enough cannons. They laughed and said, more than enough, and we've got new, improved anti-tank missiles and bunker busters to penetrate double-slab reinforced concrete, and we've got crates of napalm and crates of explosives, unlimited quantities, cornucopias, a feast for the soul like some finely seasoned delicacy, and above all, that secret weapon, the one we can't talk about. Calm down, man. The intel officer and the CO and the border police chief, who's also a colonel in that hush-hush commando unit, are all primed for the order, go. And everything's shined up like the skin of a snake, and we've got chocolate wafers on every base, and grape juice and tempo soda, and that's why we won't give in to terror. We will not fold in the face of violence. We'll never fold, no matter what, cause our billy clubs are nice and hard. God, who has chosen us from all the other nations, comforteth with apples, the fighting arm of the IDF, and the iron boxes, and the crates of fresh explosives, and we've got cluster bombs too, though of course that's off the record. Serve us burqas and cake, O women of the house, for we were slaves in the land of Egypt, but never again, and blot out the remembrance of Amalek, if you can track him down, and if you seek him in vain, blessed be the tiny match that a soldier in some crack unit will suddenly strike and set off the whole bloody mess. This one is by Hannah. Power. Why can't they just get along, he protests when he hears the numbers on the morning news. Then he's got the answer. They're people, that's why. Thus saith my neighbor, who lets his Doberman out to bark at midnight and grumbles, yeah, when I call to complain. Meanwhile, in the precincts of power, the new chief of staff who learned his trade as a fighter pilot is fending off questions from his swivel chair. And what did you feel, the reporters ask, when you dropped a bomb from an F-16? I felt a slight lift of the wing, he says. After a second, it passed.
Thank you very much, Rue, and thank you especially for reading Hannah Block's poem in translation. And I'm very glad to be here tonight in between many countries. And I think it's appropriate also, sorry, not used to this, that what has made me concerned about many things have made me concerned about Palestine and the situation of the Palestinians, and many of those things were people whom I met who are Palestinian, who have visited Palestine, and also dissident Israelis like Dalia Ravikovich, like the filmmaker Amos Gitai, whose film Kedma about European Jewish refugees arriving in Palestine, not knowing what the hell they were doing in 1948, and finding themselves exiles who are exiling others. A film that was not very well received in Israel, I would say. And in 2000, I'll read one poem. I will read a poem from the anthology. A few years ago, a group of poets were asked to either translate or compose poems that were based on Portuguese fado. I mean, here we have languages going round and coming round, for an anthology that was being sponsored by the Portuguese Gulbenkian Foundation in England, and I did not write translations. Portuguese is a language I don't read, but did and somehow or other the version, these poems and the idea of exile and the idea of saudade in the poems suggested to me another situation. There was one poem that was called Madrugada, which means dawn, or the time between the time between daybreak and dawn, and it made me think of a news story I had read about Palestine, and I imagined a young woman whose name is Sahar, which means the hour between daybreak and dawn in Arabic, and so this is called Sahara Baitunia, Sahar from Baitunia. She lives in Baitunia, and her name is Sahar. Her name is the hour between sunrise and morning. Her bougainvillea overlooks Baitunia, where a mango-bright bedspread hangs over the railing, lit by first light that reflects from a wall. Not the wall of a house or her family's orchard. She can see the graffiti, Ich bin ein Berliner. Marwan had orchards, a zaytun wal inab, olive trees, grapevines, where they went out to work between sunrise and morning. She is bint Marwan and also bint Suad. She is Ukht Tariq, Ukht Mahmoud, Ukht Asma. When jeeps and bulldozers converged on Baitunia, 120 all walked out at midday, were chased back with tear gas and rubberized bullets. 17,000 dunams of orchard and wheat fields, with a wall thrust between them and the doors of Baitunia. Her name is Sahar, at dawn in Baitunia, where the first light reflects on the wall of a prison. Ismuha Sahar, bain al-fajr wal-subh. Her name is Sahar, between sunrise and morning. And this, which is not to do with the anthology, is a book that I wrote in collaboration with the Palestinian-American poet Dima Shihabi, which began during the Israeli invasion of Gaza in 2009. Dima lives in California, I live in Paris. We were corresponding via email, and one day I sent her a poem in the Renga form, which is meant for collaboration, in fact, albeit Japanese, about a child I had seen in a YouTube, in a child from Gaza, and Dima responded with another Renga, and this began a correspondence that went on for a couple of years until we found that we had. Am I audible? Or that we found there was quite a collection of these. So I'm just going to. I'm sorry. I wish Dima were here to read her own voice. I will read both voices, but say which is which. So this was where the whole correspondence started. The poem from me. 5, 6, and righteous, the child in green in Gaza stands in her wrecked home, grubby, indignant. Her hands point. She explains what was done, bombed, burned. It all smells like gas. We had to throw our clothes away. The earrings my father gave me. No mortar, resistant. The burnt cradle. Dima's voice. Breaks over the cold mountains of North Carolina, where a Cherokee poet huddles in a cottage by an indigo fire. She sees the child and says, "This is the new trail of tears. Call out O outspread Indian nation, let's braid our hair with the pulverized gravel of Palestine. Witness, she says, the unpinned knuckles of this child. Feel the burlap curtains whip across my voice. The third floor window in Belleville, dyed blue-purple like the hyacinth on the windowsill. Nejma does math homework. Strike today, but school tomorrow. Coming back from the demo, they sang in the sink. They sang in the street. Rêve général. The slogan makes her smile. One winter sun, Dima's voice, is grafted on the broken sink that Maher uses for percussion. He sings Frank Sinatra in a deep cigarette voice as the bombs catapult down. It's now or never. He pauses and his niece releases her breath over the scratchy phone line between Gaza and California. Where are the hills? My voice. He saw from New York. Marhaba, ya Nafisa. Girl, you watch your back. Tanks and uniforms zap guys' minds worse than testosterone, but you were gorgeous, reasoning as you dodged to keep them from aiming at the brothers behind you, dancing along the barbed wire.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce, for putting everything in a wonderful context. I'm going to, Rue was very generous when we were asked, when she asked me to be part of this wonderful anthology, that we could submit something, a piece of writing, and also we could write a prose explanation, or pretty much what we wanted to in terms of explaining why we were in this anthology. So I'm going to read the prose piece that I wrote, and then I'm going to read the poem that's in the anthology. Born in 1948, I am of a generation of American poets whose entire life has been lived in a period of continuous violence, a series of successive, now permanent foreign wars, and domestically, the equivalent of class and race-driven civil wars. In each of my books of poems, I have written of this violence and its transmogrifications inside and outside our geographical borders. It is a violence which, in different forms, has been a fundamental reality of the United States of America from its beginnings. It is a violence that has also been a part of our literature from the beginning, in our poetry and in our prose, a fundamental part of our language, our sensibilities, our imaginations, our aesthetics. There is for me an additional biographical dimension to it. My grandparents, Lebanese and Syrian Catholics, emigrated to the United States over a century ago, when Lebanon was still a part of Ottoman Syria. They were among the first emigres from the Arab world to Detroit. My mother and father were born in Detroit and lived their entire lives there. I was born and raised in Detroit and was from childhood a part of Detroit's Arab American community. My Lebanese and Syrian identity and heritage and the imperialist, colonialist, post-colonialist, corporatist, techno-capitalist, militarist war-making by the United States in Southwest Asia and North Africa during my lifetime have also been a part of my poetry from the start. Newsback, even further than that, the poem I'm going to be reading, is situated in these, among other contexts. It was written during and in the aftermath of the invasion and occupation of Iraq by the United States in 2003. This is a poem in 3 parts, and the third part is a dialogue. It's in a dialogue form. Newsback, even further than that. 1. Dust, the dust of a dust storm. Yellow, black, brown haze smoke. a baby photographed with half a head. The stolen thoroughbred, a boy is riding bareback attacked by a lion. The palace fixed up as a forward command post. This, says Air War Commander Mosley, would make a pretty nice casino. Why is such a detailed description necessary? That smell in the air is the smell of burned human flesh. Those low-flying A-10 warthogs on each of them firing 100 bullets a second. 2. The president refuses to answer a question he wasn't asked. The president denies his eyes are the eyes of a lobster. The map is being drawn. Mosul in the north, Baghdad in the center, Basra in the south. The news back even further than that. He says he is the prophet Ezekiel. In the great mudflats by the river Chebar, he has seen, he proclaims, 4 angels, each with 6 wings on a fiery wheel. Collaborators cut into pieces and burnt to death in public on spits like lambs. And spray paint across the armored personnel carrier, Crazy Train, Rebel, got oil. There, on Sadoun Street, in a wheelbarrow, coil of wire, a carpet, rolled, Persian, antique. 3. I've just been to see her. It's made her mad. Angry, yes, of course, but I mean mad. Truly mad. She spoke quietly, quickly, maniacally. War game. They're using war game as a verb. They didn't war game the chaos. Chaos. Do you think they care about the chaos? The chaos just makes it easier for them to get what they want. War game. What they've war gamed is the oil. Their possession of the oil. What they've war gamed is the killing, the destruction. What they've war gamed is their greed. Had I noticed that Lebanon had become an abstract noun, as in the Lebanonization of? It may just as well have been 2 or 3 atomic bombs, the amount of depleted uranium in their bombs, the bombs in this war, the bombs in the war before this. Uranium's in the groundwater now. Uranium is throughout the entire ecology by now. How many generations are going to be contaminated by it, die of it, be poisoned by it? War, a wartime without limits. Techno-capital war, a part of our bodies, of the body politic. She quoted Pound, the P's and Cantos. She couldn't remember which. There are no righteous wars. There is no righteous violence, she said. It's neurobiological with people like this. People who need to destroy and who need to kill like this. And what we're seeing now is nothing compared to what we'll see in the future.
I'm just want to see if is this working?
Yeah.
You have to hold it really close? Is that working?
No, it's not.
This is not. Okay. How's that? Is that better? Okay. So I'm just going to talk for a minute about, how I ended up being in this anthology and how I ended up coming to do Palestine work. I've been working with Code Pink Women for Peace, which is an anti-war organization, since 2003. And then in 2009, we got involved as Code Pink, around the Gaza assault. I started working on a boycott campaign, sort of as the campaign manager for the Ahava, Stolen Beauty Ahava boycott campaign against an Israeli cosmetics company that has its manufacturing plant in the occupied West Bank and pillages resources from the occupied West Bank. So I was very involved with this anti-war work and then with the boycott work, and my writing work is sort of goes on a sort of parallel but separate track, which is my fiction and my poetry is all around post-genocide Armenian diaspora experience. So these were sort of two parallel tracks. And then in 2010, I was offered the opportunity to go on the Palestine Festival of Literature, where I felt like it was bringing these two things together, the activist work and the writing. So we basically did a 10-day reality tour of the occupation of the West Bank, which was super grueling, super harrowing. But I was on the bus with writers for these amazing writers from all over the world, including writers in Palestine, and so it was a great opportunity to bring those two things together. And then when I came back, I ended up writing. I was asked by Omar Hamilton, who's a producer at PalFest. Somebody was putting together an anthology called Letters to Palestine or Letters to Jerusalem. So I wrote a poem. And so for the anthology, I wrote a little description of how the poem came about, and then I'll read the poem. Many years ago, when I was a student in Paris, I was required to take a French for Foreign Students course before the start of the term. The class was a veritable United Nations with representatives from Argentina, Poland, Greece, Germany, Iraq, and Iran, among other countries. I was the only American, and when the teacher taught us French slang, she laughed uproariously at my Boston accent. One day, our teacher asked us to pair up for an oral presentation. I was assigned the one Palestinian, a handsome guy with a beard. We went for coffee to prepare our assignment, and he told me, "I'm glad we're doing this together. We will talk about our people, the Palestinians and the Armenians, and their histories of dispossession and struggle." I looked at him blankly. I was a young American who knew little about my own people's tragic experiences in 1915, and far less about the travails of the Palestinian people. This poem is an homage to the extraordinary grace with which that young man, whose name has sadly escaped me after all these years, met my terrible ignorance. It's called Letter to Palestine with Armenian Proverbs. In a foreign place, the exile has no face. You wake up in the morning and forget where you are. The smell of coffee from the kitchen, the sound of slippers across the linoleum floor. It could be any country. When you look in the mirror, you see the eyes of your grandfather. He expects something from you, but he won't tell you what. Better to go into captivity with the whole village than to go to a wedding alone. The fabric was torn. With scraps you have made a tent. You have fashioned a kite. You have sewn a dress. You have wrapped yourself in a flag. They have separated you with gun, grenade, barbed wire, wall, prison, passport. They have underestimated your will. The hungry dream of bread, the thirsty of water. Passing from one village to the next, without obstacle, without document, without your heart thumping up near your throat. Turning the key in the lock, you enter through a door you have never passed through before, except in your grandmother's stories and in your dreams.
Hi. I'm honored to be on this panel because I'm not in this book, and Rue, I think, because I had signed the pen letter of Palestine, invited me to join you guys today.
You should explain what the pen letter is.
Oh,
Just briefly.
well, there's a PEN, which is a writers organization, is having a World Voices festival, I think, in May, and some of the funding, and so there are some Israeli writers coming to it, and some of the funding comes from the government of Israel, and so I think writers protested that because of Israel's treatment of Palestine at this time, and so there was a letter in which that lots of us signed, basically saying that we just protested, Israel's money. It wasn't the writers, obviously, it was the money. And I don't know if there were there Palestinian writers who tried to come or were even invited?
3 years ago, there was a Palestine panel at the Penn Festival, and one of the writers, Najwan Darwish, back there, was on that panel. So there was, but that was 3 years ago. As far as I know, there are no Palestinian writers this year.
So that basically, I think my connection, honestly, is emotional. I mean, I think as a person, affected by local and global and national politics. I'm very cognizant of which things actually get me on the streets, and Palestine was one of them a couple of years ago, and it felt very vital. And yet, and strangely connected to my own experience lately, which is that, and I love that Nancy's from Watertown. I'm from Arlington, Massachusetts, and I've been doing a residency this month at Harvard, and it's been kind of a wonderful, comfortable, and shocking experience because I'm a townie, and so I grew up being part of. Is this not working?
It
Are we
is.
just?
Yeah, you're fine. Go ahead. It's not
I tried to turn this off.
Oh,
Maybe that will
okay.
help that be on.
Okay.
I don't know.
Now what?
Oh wait,
We can hear you.
the green there.
Now it's on.
Yeah.
So how did you hear what I said before?
Yeah.
My voice carries, yeah. So I think one of the things that's been interesting about being in Cambridge in 2016 as basically somebody whose family we were like servant class at Harvard, and suddenly I'm there with an ID doing research in the library, and I just found myself recollecting that every year one of the things you would dread as a Boston resident was the fall, because they would come. And what it meant was just legions and legions of kids from colleges all over America. And one of the senses you always had was that it then would become their city and their town and their river and their stores and their, and basically you would be servant class. And so it's very odd to be on the other side of that at this moment in time. But as a New Yorker too, the exact same thing was the case, which was that every fall the students would come, and again as denizens of the East Village, and we would, Though as historic occupiers, most of us from an earlier generation would watch these kids come every fall, and it was like, oh no. And there was one word, which was NYU. It was like, here they come ruining the neighborhood, occupying our restaurants, and so on. And I think it connects to the obvious larger phenomena which is happening all over the country of gentrification, and we all sort of kind of groan and feel like our home is not the place that it was, and that goes, it obviously goes to, situations of people losing their homes. But there was a real gentrification horror story which I read lately in the media, which I'm sure some of you guys read, which was Rebecca Solnit's account of the death in 2014 of Alejandro Nieto, and he was a guy who lived in the Bay Area, was a resident of a certain neighborhood for his whole life, and he worked as a security guard at someplace, and he was having a break. He was eating a burrito on a park bench, and he had a taser as part of his job. And some of the and San Francisco, as we know, is probably the capital of gentrification at this point in time, and some of the new residents of San Francisco saw this suspicious-looking, i.e. Latino guy sitting there with a gun, as they reported, though it was like brightly yellow stripe. Anybody who knew anything about, of course I don't know anything about guns or tasers, would know that this was not a gun, but they called 911, and within moments police were there, and within not too many moments after that he was basically gunned down. He was dead, and it seemed to me that it was what it was kind of one of the most violent accounts of gentrification, and I just simply thought one of the difficulties of Americans who can't quite comprehend, and of course the largest part of it is that we just don't hear about it in the news, of course, we just are, what is the difference between our government and the Israeli government in terms of policies, and so, but I think that because we don't get the information, and because we only hear about, if the level of violence that occurred in the case of Alejandro Nieto or anybody who is racially profiled in any of the cities across America, that we're hearing about thanks to technology, but if that was multiplied to the level of what is going on daily in Palestine, that is utterly invisible to all of us in our daily lives. So, I guess I'm simply taking the micro experience of occupation, which I felt like throughout my life around class and around being female, of course. I think every woman in America, when you realize that the right to choose could be taken away, has to do with the fact that we're an occupied country, gender-wise, that we're not. sexuality, through gender, and so on. So my reason for sitting in this seat tonight is because it's like all of these causes are interlocked, and I think the tragedy of our time is that we've got increased communication with some of the things that are going on in our country, but it still doesn't get outside of the United States in terms of what's actually going on daily in Palestine and so I'm simply going to read a poem, it's called The City, and it's dedicated to Stephen Boyer, who was a young poet who was involved in the Occupy moment in New York City. And there was an Occupy library, which when Occupy was taken down, they basically just threw all, it was the sustenance of besides food, there was the sustenance of books. And when they took down Occupy, they just simply threw them all in the gutter or threw them into dumpsters, and there was, there was no history anymore for what Stephen and so many people had done to Occupy. So this is called The City for Stephen Boyer. In the orange speck that you see moving around it is a dog, an orange dog. It was my dog. The city is juicy and bloody at night, stabbing my eyes. An orange dog walking through a town of dead leaves with a green stripe of chicken smell. Off, on. Occupy invented the city at night. All its empty wares are everywhere now. Now is a wide cement path. I love when she performs the orange stripe madly again and again in the house. She likes it inside her cage, and she likes out. There's water everywhere when the bottom drops out. Oh, mammal, you are my love. My loneliness and lustrous path, a screen. I shoot these themes, I mean my jism. That look on your face is covered with my thought. I might stop for a long while now, then again I may not. This is the big machine and we are in it. Occupy ruined everything. The city is gone, the meat trucks cry. In this chalice, in this cherished empty bell, capitalism gnawing on its bone, its empty blazing, empty bone, its porny plastic bone, and no one's home. I scrawl on your wall, how many mill buildings paid for with skulls, the girls who were stolen and married, spent, the boys who were burned there living in your rooms, your clothes, asshole, are theirs. Thank you.
I think now you can give in to your desire to clap for these people. And the floor is open for questions. We have a mic that works.
Do we have two mics that work?
Yeah. Keep this one in the mic.
I wonder if either we have am I audible?
Yes.
We have two Palestinian poets present with us tonight, Najwan Darwish and Natalia Handel, and I wonder if either of them have something to say.
Is that a yes?
No, I don't think we have. I don't know if
You're
if
saying
it will
something
come
now,
up.
here.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've all spoken, very eloquently, and I'm sure the audience have questions for you. But the solidarity, of course, is important, and most importantly, the dialogue is what's key here. And I think that's what this book does.
Good evening, everyone. Actually, I'm touched by the text you are reading, and above all, they are wonderful texts. Thank you.
Can I ask a question since I have the mic now? Yeah. Thank you so much for the project and everyone who contributed, and also the shout out to the Occupy People's Library, which I was also volunteering. But I was thinking about the reference back to these earlier projects, the Writers Take Sides in the Spanish Civil War, the Writers Take Sides in Vietnam, both of which you mentioned in your intro, which I just glanced at. and thinking about the fact that those were about taking sides. Do you support the Spanish Republic or not? Or do you support the fascists, you know? Likewise, with the Vietnam question, I believe was a lot more complicated, but I'm wondering, considering that the book is called American Writers on, and not for Palestine, was there a similar kind of question or desire to have people come out and take a side, as opposed to what's often the kind of orchestration of like a cultural exchange between Israeli and Palestinian artists, as though it is just two sides in a conflict. So, thank you.
Well, I mean, just to make note, which has been said before, it's not a conflict unless it is between equal parties. So, but we had a really a long discussion about the whole taking sides. I didn't want it to say taking sides because, for one thing, that is a harder. It would instantly get trashed. A lot of the writers, I would have found it even more difficult to get them to write if I said, if I took that kind of approach. But also, we wanted to address the fact that we often talk about, even Jon Stewart did the little funny thing about, he spoke about Palestine and it became this big, huge deal, like, oh my God, he said this thing about Palestine. But it was, even he mentioned it as though there were two equally strong voices talking about the issue of the occupation of Palestine in the United States, and there isn't. There is one voice and one silence. So we didn't want to, we wanted to, so when I say, writers on Palestine, they are talking about Palestine and what that means for each of these writers. And it is not, I mean, if you look at it, it isn't a for Palestine, but it is certainly an examination and a real deep involvement with Palestine, which has been missing from the national conversation. And the other part of it, I mean, the other reason for the project is, of course, the fact that in every other part of the world, writers are at the forefront of talking about political events. And they feel, I mean, because we have the words, we have the language, there is no reason we shouldn't. But it is not true in the United States. It is very rare. And so in that sense too, not that they do not, but in general, as a group, we are reluctant to take on business projects. And the other reason, Eileen, for having you here is because it's not just about, like, as Natalie pointed out, it's not just about the 65 writers who are in this book, but the book is the beginning of a conversation, and to include other voices and have other people join in speaking about Palestine. And so we were trying to get as many people here as possible who did not necessarily have to be in the anthology, but people who were willing to talk about the issue, and we need more and more people to do that. So all of you feel free to of course buy the anthology, because part of the proceeds go, as all the writers donated their payment to PalFest, the Palestine Festival of Literature, and the proceeds of the book also go back to the Palestine Festival of Literature. So buy the book, but also feel perfectly entitled to take on that responsibility of speaking.
Well, I don't have too much to add to what Ruth said, except that I know several of my Palestinian writer friends, poets, fiction writers, essayists, who are constantly asked to be part of anthologies that are anthologies of Israeli and Palestinian writers, which is, let's you wolves and you sheep sit down and have a good conversation. Only Palestinian writers, anything but sheep. I especially, as Ruth said, especially in this country where only one side of that conversation gets heard, where the translations from the work of Palestinian writers and other writers working in Arabic are minimal and minimally distributed, that it's important to do an anthology with this focus, which did not mean that, for example, the poem by Dalia Ravikovich is a poem by an Israeli pro-Palestinian activist who was at once, as I said in something I once wrote about her, I hate their politics, they praise my words, which was part of her fate.
Do any of you? That's okay. Do any of you know, or can you address the question of within PEN about PEN's association about taking the Israeli government money, or the discussion within writers within PEN? Can you address how that has gone? Like, who are the proponents of? Like, what's the
Pat,
mechanics of
who's
that?
sitting right next to you, actually was at the Penn offices yesterday just talking with them, so maybe do you want to?
Yes.
Well, you can talk about writers. I can say something about Penn.
Please.
But
No, it's,
You would go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Go
The question
Yeah.
is about Penn.
The question is about Penn.
Yeah, so,
let's see if this works. It's not
No,
working, is it?
Power.
Okay, it doesn't matter. So I'm with Adala New York, the New York campaign for the boycott of Israel, and we primarily focus on supporting the Palestinian call for a boycott of Israel, economic, academic, and cultural. We all knew that this problem had occurred in the past at Penn, and this year we managed to get ahead of it before the festival was taking place. Managed to put together, working with a lot of the writers here, a letter to Penn calling on them to reject Israeli government sponsorship, which they have had about 6 times in the last 12 years. Sent them a letter 3 weeks ago. The numbers of signers have grown now to about 160 prominent writers and 12,000 people in total at this point. Yesterday we went to deliver the letter to Penn, just to deliver the letter and also deliver statements by a number of writers who have added to signing the letter by explaining why they signed the letter, and a number of those people are here as well. We went to the office with a delegation of people from, someone from OR Books, from Verso, and two people from Adala, New York. We didn't know if they would agree to meet with us. We didn't try to make an appointment, but when we got there, we asked to meet with the director of Penn, Suzanne Nossel, who's an ex-long-term State Department employee. She did agree to meet with us. She primarily spoke in platitudes, which are about what you would expect of a former and still diplomat in many senses. She said that we had legitimate concerns, or the writers had raised legitimate concerns, that type of language. We wouldn't be satisfied with her response today. They need time and space to resolve the issue, et cetera, et cetera. One of the people with us, John Oakes from OR Books, specifically said, if we can fundraise for the Israeli writers, and we're willing to do that, we're willing to provide that money instead of the Israeli government funding, will you return the money? And she said, no, we can't do that. And she said, we can't do that now, and there's something about boycott that's just a very difficult word for people to accept. And that's how things ended, and so the campaign continues, and we encourage people to sign the letter, which is online on our site, adlahny.org. If you haven't signed the letter, share information about the campaign on social media. Write to Penn, contact Penn, and anybody else who's involved in the campaign. All of you are very welcome to add thoughts, ideas about what's going on.
I would just like to say that I didn't think when we went into this, who was organizing this letter, that we would win this year. But I thought that if we made a big enough stink and we got enough press, which we've managed to do, and got enough heavy-hitting writers to sign the letter, and we've been working very hard to draw people in, I doubt that they'll take the money again. I don't think this will happen again next year, is what I think. But I don't think there's any way, I didn't think going in that there was any way they would, reject the money now. But I think one of the things they're gonna have to do, which is also this executive director said, is have at their board meeting, have a discussion about what the guidelines are for accepting money from any government, from any national organization, because I'm sure there are many, I don't believe they've ever taken money from China, for example, or North Korea, and but I think they're going to have to make explicit guidelines, and then they will apply those guidelines, and I don't think Israel will make the cut, actually.
Do they get money from the NEA?
Yes.
Yes.
Our government?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, but I mean, there's two things. One thing is that we're organizing a public discussion of the issues around Penn, transparency, the way in which Suzanne was put into the position of executive director, which was not done in a democratic way, and why that was. And these are all, and who appoints the board and how they get to be on that board. These are all questions that are very relevant to writers, and particularly the PEN membership. So we are having a public discussion of that on the 19th of May. So
Here in New York?
Here in New York.
Where?
We're still discussing, and we want people from PEN. We are inviting Suzanne and Andrew Solomon and other people from the board to be there as a reasonable discussion about. I mean, because we feel that if you have a position you find defensible, then you ought to be able to speak in public about it, and that we should discuss all these issues. And the board at PEN, like any group of writers, is a kind of a ad hoc collection of people, and they may not have had anybody pressuring them to really be involved in the decisions that are being made. The other thing is that there is a distinction. I think there should be no money from any government, but the NEA as an organization that's funding, say, as Colin Robinson Moore books pointed out, a theater production is very different from funding PEN, which has a political will and agenda. And then if you take that into the State Department, now you're actually advocating for certain things that the State Department wants you to do, which is a very specific political agenda. So say we have Donald Trump as president and you are taking money from the State Department, you are going to be doing a lot of nation building and advocacy that isn't what the PEN membership believes PEN is chartered to do. There was one other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about it. I forget it.
Just as a starter, two writers who were, because of the letter, two writers who were scheduled to perform to read in the PEN World Voices Festival, Jennifer Hofer and Omar Berada, have pulled out of the festival. In support of the boycott, or unless the Israeli government money is returned, and that I think will probably impress the. I mean, that's only two, but that will still.
There were three
But
more.
there
They
were
canceled the
afterwards.
panel. There was another
Yeah.
poetry panel called The Language of War that was canceled, and those three.
Okay, so
those three people pulled out too.
so that makes five. That's,
One other comment about the boycott question is that when they talk about the boycott, PEN, by virtue of the fact that it has never spoken, PEN American, PEN International has, PEN American, has never spoken on behalf of any Palestinian writer, journalist, artist who has been incarcerated or silenced. They have done so when it is somebody else who's doing it, but not Israel. So they had this whole thing for Fast fired by Saudi Arabia, but not any Palestinians within. So in some ways, it's boycotting Palestinians itself, while saying we don't do boycotts.
Right.
So it's just something to think about when you're presented with that argument. The other thing is that they keep referencing a policy that was articulated in 2006. They refer to that and say, well, we made this policy that says we don't support cultural boycotts. But that policy was formulated because it was to do with Britain, and it was a boycott against writers, specifically, preventing them from saying we are uninviting Israeli academics, we're not going to do anything with them. And this is very different. This is not saying we don't preventing exchange, fair exchange of ideas, which is what PEN is about.
And I wanted to add one thing, because I was involved in helping to put together the Palestine panel 3 years ago, and many of the writers are funded by their national governments. The French government gets money, the Austrian, for whatever of their writers who are coming. But because Palestine doesn't really have a real government or have these kind of cultural organizations, there was no money, so we had to raise the money for that panel. So we raised the money from different foundations and individual donors who underwrote the participation of the Palestinian writers. So if that's what we did for Palestinian writers, that is something that could be equally done for Israeli writers.
I believe, and I'm embarrassed to have forgotten her name, but maybe Najwan, you remember, there was a Palestinian woman poet who was jailed in Israel for a poem that
A Facebook post. Wasn't it a Facebook post?
No, I'm not sure if it was on Facebook, but I know it was a poem that she wrote and recited. I'd read about it on the Arab literature blog, and
Few days ago.
Sorry.
Few days ago, I
days
think,
ago.
something like 4
Yes,
days
3
ago.
days ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but
So-
she had posted it on
At
Facebook, and that was how it
how it
came to attention, yeah.
The other part is that Penn has a surplus in their budget of 1.49 million. 1.49 million, but they're standing by the decision to take $5,000 from Israel. So you know that it's not a question of finances that the festival is suffering. It's a political decision. It's 10.
It's 10, okay.
Did,
Yeah,
did,
per writer.
I'm sure that Penn supported the South African anti-apartheid boycott.
See, that's something I haven't. I don't know. Research. I haven't researched that, so I can't really.
Actually, to add one point to that, which is important for everybody to understand, the Palestinian cultural boycott call includes specific guidelines. And those guidelines focus on the Israeli government and complicit institutions, and very specifically not on individuals, with the aim of not limiting individual freedom of expression. That's actually an evolution from the South African boycott call, which did not include that kind of, freedom for individual freedom of expression, and was a blanket boycott call. So the Palestinian, Gillian Slobo, who signed the letter and is a South African British writer, ex-head of British Penn, wrote a statement saying that she finds the Palestinian call to be a kind of more sophisticated development from the South African cultural boycott call, more nuanced in its not restricting individual freedom of expression.
Hi. I'm also with Adala New York.
It's not working.
I can just project. I was just wondering if you could speak more about cultural boycott generally, what you view as the political efficacy of cultural boycott, and perhaps any ideas you have for future cultural boycott initiatives.
I'm not really the expert. I don't know, Pat, if you wanted to talk about it, but I think for the writers, there is the little aspect that in Israel, people who receive funding from the Israeli government, Israeli writers, have to sign a statement of basically allegiance to the Israeli occupation. And if they do not, then they cannot receive state funding, and that is true for institutions like arts institutions and things like that. So the more information that I think artists and writers, American writers, get to know, the more likely it is that they will see the importance of the cultural boycott, and also to be more clear in sharing the information that Pat just shared with everybody about the nuance in the wording of how the cultural boycott is organized for Palestine.
And again, just what the cultural boycott and the general boycott of Israel, or boycott of the Israeli occupation, has been opposed in ways that the boycott of South Africa absolutely never was. If you consider all of the stuff going on in universities in America, where it's said it's being made illegal simply to propose and to support the boycott, but it is illegal in France, the whole country, just a country which has recognized Palestine in the United Nations, but it is illegal in France to support the boycott of and to promote the boycott of Israeli government, Israeli products, Israeli anything. As I was saying to Larry the other day, a woman at a demonstration which had nothing to do with Palestine was wearing a BDS T-shirt, and she was arrested and released after a few hours. But I mean, I have that T-shirt. I've worn it on the metro, and so it is illegal to promote the BDS in the entire country of France.
Wow.
So it's the problem is not just here. And needless to say, the support for the boycott of South Africa was very, very strong in France.
How did that come about? How did that come about? And how long has it been in effect?
This has been going on over the past 6-9 months. Discussions in the supposedly socialist government, which has some very strong supporters not just the existence of Israel, but of the Israeli government in it, so that even though it's supposedly a government of the left, it is making moves and declarations and laws that would not surprise you coming from a far right-wing government. What led to what? Not being.
No. But you say what the argument is that boycott against Israel is a form of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
So it's a form of racism. It's a form of hatred. So that it needs to be stamped out. It needs to be legislated against. But we have even things like that going on here at the University of California Board of Regents. Just passed something where they were saying that they were against anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic forms of BDS. So now there's going to be somebody who's going to be doing an arbitration about what forms of boycott are anti-Semitic forms of boycott and what forms
and then
aren't.
Originally they
just wanted to have just to say that
if you were anti-Zionist,
BDS was, and also that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. Oh, right, that's it. That it was that. No, they didn't stop it. They said that anti-Semitic forms of anti-Zionism. Right. So that's the thing.
That ought to be challengeable in court. So.
I know, but the thing that's happening is that our opposition, they have a lot of money and they have organized many attorneys. They realize that they're losing. There was an article today that was, I can't remember if it was AP or Agence France Presse, but it was basically saying that boycott has gone global and that while the boycott movement has popular support around the world, that they're going to use legal measures, from France to the United States to here and there, and they're trying to outlaw BDS state by state. And Ron Lauder, the billionaire, was quoted as saying that they pulled together 40 attorneys to work on this. And for us, we have Palestine Legal, which is a group of 4 attorneys that cover the entire country that are basically running around putting out fires as students and faculty and state legislatures are harassing sort of boycott activists.
Now, in France, which is perhaps understandable considering the history of the occupation, although there are laws about racist speech and hate speech, but there's a specific law about anti-Semitic speech that is not part of those same laws. So if they can succeed in confounding BDS with that somehow or other that this is anti-Semitic, then it is de facto illegal.
They seem to have kept it pretty quiet because I read the Le Monde pretty regularly, and I didn't see any mention of this illegality of BDS.
Well, if you look in Le Monde, if you look in the Mediapart online, for example, which is or even in Agence France Presse, but Mediapart is a good.
I think the best coverage of this is Glenn Greenwald's on The Intercept. He's written several articles about it. They're very clear, very much to the point, going back, I think, to last October.
Back to your question, because you're actually asking about concrete things that can be done. Because when we listen to all this and you think about the 40 attorneys and all the billions of money that's behind preventing the BDS, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. One thing I was just thinking about is that, we have the 160 odd writers now on this letter to PEN, and the how many did you mention?
12,000.
12,000 other signatories to that letter, is to actually take that letter and pass it around writers in general, beyond PEN, to say, do you support this thing? Because I think there is a lot of support for it. There are people who are within PEN who may not want to do that, or may not want to sign the letter to PEN, but would sign a letter that is a larger thing that then we can maybe collect money for, like a New York Times ad or, something like that. And because each of those writers could contribute a little bit to raise the vast sums that you need to do that. But it's possible. But that's something we could do. You're in the literary world.
had your hand up. As a teacher, I know this.
Okay. No.
No, I just wanted to say that writers with academic jobs in this country can get in deep shit for supporting BDS. I was just thinking of everything that Sarah Schulman, as a Jewish American lesbian socialist writer, has been getting at CUNY, where she works for the work that she's been doing supporting BDS, and she has indeed been accused of anti-Semitism and goodness knows what else.
Sarah has a wonderful essay in the book about solidarity and what it means to be in solidarity with Palestine, and different ways of thinking about that, which isn't like some endless or all them, like we've taken this movement, but more real concrete ways in which you can do that work. It's not the end of the book. It's a good call to action. But also when you think about it, I mean, I was talking about this just today about how we approach these things and feel like we have something to lose, but a lot of the time the burden of taking these things on falls on people who don't have a lot of power, have a lot to lose, and still have to take it on, because people who have more power and can and do have voices in places like in academia, especially if they've taken jobs, which I don't, do not want to take it on, because there is this sense of I might lose something wrong. I mean, when I think about Hannah, what is there to lose for her? It's her life. For me, when this was all happening, when I think of what is there to lose, I lost my mother. I had breast cancer. My daughter was very sick. I mean, these are things to lose.
You could lose your job working for Bernie Sanders.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. That's true.
I mean, didn't?
Yeah. There's a writers for Bernie Sanders too. I think we might be in opposite camps, but there's a writers for Bernie Sanders that you can sign too.
So I will add then.
I knew you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was going to let other people say things, but just to mention that as Adela New York, we're also trying to mobilize more broadly on the New York level in support of cultural boycott, and we do currently have a broader cultural boycott pledge on our website that we're asking people to. We haven't emphasized that during this period because we're focusing on Penn at this point, but that is also part of our long-term plan, is to try to mobilize people to sign up to support that, but also to find different kinds of activities that people can do in support of cultural boycott in New York City. So we probably will send out to all the signers at some point our general cultural boycott pledge and ask people to sign on to that, but also with the idea of reaching out to people to find more things that we can do in New York City.
I mean, I don't know if everybody here is a writer, but I do believe in changing the place that you're in. So, for instance, the Archaeologists Association they've passed a resolution in support of the boycott. So I think having groups do that is
And on this activist note, perhaps we can, you can clap for the people again. Shall we?